So folks, we're back with another Titans card review. This time around we've got Death Knight, and as of a few minutes ago, every single Death Knight card has been revealed for the Titans expansion. That means we've got 9 new cards to break down here, including the other legendary for Death Knight, which is going to kick off an entire deck slash archetype package thingy here for DKs. So let's talk about Helia. She is a 4-mana 4/4 single unholy rune, battle cry, shuffle all 3 plagues into your opponent's deck. Plagues they draw this game are unending. So the plagues you can see here next to her, there is a Frost Plague, Unholy Plague, and Blood Plague. They all deal 2 damage to the opponent at a base, and then they have some other upside. Frost is going to make the opponent's next card they play cost 1 more, up to a peak of 10. Unholy Plague is going to summon a 2/2 for you, and Blood Plague is going to restore 2 health to you. So certainly it seemed to align pretty well with their rune types there. And obviously that means you're netting a lot of additional incremental value each time one of these happens. Not just damage, but stuff. You're getting bonuses. And importantly, that last line of Helia's text there, plagues they draw this game are unending. What that means is once they draw a plague, it's going to actually be shuffled back into their deck. So after Helia gets played, they're not going to be reducing the number of plagues in their deck, which means over the course of the game, proportionally, they're just going to have a higher and higher likelihood to draw into these plagues because the plague number is not reducing, but their normal cards are reducing in deck, minus, them shuffling in a bunch of extra stuff. So it creates this real race of sorts where they're eventually just going to get overwhelmed by this chip damage, or maybe just overwhelmed by all the bonuses. Like, oh my god, they've just healed too much, or oh, they just keep summoning 2/2s. Oh my god, I can't deal with this endless wave of 2/2s. So it's kind of like bombs and Bomb Warrior, less damage, but additional kind of annoyances along the way, and they just don't go away either. If Helia is played, we're going to see additional cards that shuffle plagues in that might be drawn before Helia, but certainly if you hit the Helia here, you've got a win condition set up long term. The goal then will just be about survivability, ensuring that you can last long enough to increase the likelihood that your opponent has drawn into enough plagues to net you the ability to win. Now, notably, as we're going to look at these other cards, the rune types here, we've got single unholy, double unholy, and unholy frost for the down with the ship. That Unholy Frost is important because if you want to run down with the ship and the double unholy runes, that means you're excluding blood from the package, which might limit your survivability enough, because I think ultimately the goal here is going to be stay alive long enough until they just fall over from all the plagues. Blood, even in single unholy or single blood rune, does have some really helpful tools for that. Things like Death Strike or No Muncher are great cards to increase your survivability if you're trying to outlast the opponent and let your plagues do the work. So it is possible a card like Down with the Ship actually gets cut in favor of running Blood Rune instead for some of that increased survivability. That's something to keep in mind. Or if you go all in on plagues, you might have a faster race basically trying to overwhelm them. It may depend a little bit on the meta too, because obviously this kind of package punishes card draw. If the opponent's drawing a ton of cards, as so many people love to do, Demon Hunters just drawing through their entire decks and stuff. The more they draw, the more at risk they are of hitting these plagues and overwhelming themselves with downside with stuff or damage. Just maybe killing themselves. They draw too many cards in a row. It's like, oh god, I just took 6 from plagues. Oh no, what have I done? Sort of thing. So I think this is a really, really fun idea here to kind of punish the excessive card draw we've seen so much in Hearthstone. I think this is actually going to look really competitive too. I think Death Knight's the right sort of class for this sort of damage over time aspect. I don't know that there will be any ways to make your opponent draw all of this stuff at once. Anything like that seems unlikely. There's some mill stuff in Hearthstone occasionally, but I think playing this straight up and just kind of outlasting the opponent will be the name of the game. And really intrigued to give this deck a try, because I love the idea of just giving them a billion plagues and saying deal with it, and then just tanking up, sitting back and watching the plagues wreak havoc. That sounds really fun, and I honestly think it sounds pretty good too. So next up is Staff of the Primus, a 1-mana 1/3 weapon. It's gonna also give you some plagues here. After your hero attack, shuffle a random plague into your opponent's deck. So that's 3 total plagues off the Staff of the Primus. That's nuts if they were to hit all three, right? A 1/3 weapon that deals 6 damage, summons you a 2/2, heals for 2, and increases the cost of a card. That sounds completely bonkers. Now, in reality, you know, not every game they're going to draw all 3, but, you know, if you hit it on Holy Plague, that makes this weapon really nuts. Getting a 2/2, 2 damage, and, you know, a solid base weapon, too. The 1/3 is not anything to scoff at. That's either some chip damage to face, pops Divine Shields, eats some 1/1s. That still has some value in and of itself. So yeah, this looks like a really good core piece, a good way to get plagues rolling early, which, you know, in some ways you might be sad that your plagues are rolling early if you want to make sure Helia comes down to give you the unending plagues, but I don't think so. The upsides on these, maybe you're not happy about a blood plague getting drawn early, but I think you're okay if an unholy or frost plague get drawn early, because the disruption in frost, the body on unholy, that's okay, right? You'll get the plagues eventually that are unending off Helia, but in the meantime you need to get things moving. I think it's okay to get these rolling early, and of course most of them will stay tucked away in the deck. And then eventually you'll play Hela, hopefully on turn 4 or whatever, and it'll be fine. If 1 or 2 slip through, that's not a big risk. So yeah, this looks like a really good option to me. Next up, we have the Distressed Cavalier. This is a 2-mana 3/2 undead with Death Rattle. Shuffle 2 random plagues into your opponent's deck. So another good on-curve building block here for a plague deck. This has some additional upsides as well. Undead, of course, we know can be really good for Death Knights and Unholy Death Knights in particular. Death Rattles can be really good for Death Knights and Unholy Death Knights in particular. So we may have ways to duplicate and increase the number of plagues shuffled off this Distressed Cavalier by having additional Death Rattle synergies, which obviously just is going to ramp up even faster and harder. So this just checks a lot of boxes basically for DKs, and again, looks like a great option. And then finally, we have Down with the Ship. This is a 2-mana Shadow spell. This one's going to deal 3 damage to a minion. And if it dies, you're going to shuffle 2 random plagues into your opponent's deck. So this is on the other side, a little bit more reactive card, little removal. We've certainly seen a lot of these 2-mana deal 3s. There's the one in Death Knight that gives you a 2/2 that's very common. There's also the Frost one, I guess, too, that discovers you a card. There's also the Blood one that gives you a corpse, but that one's a little cheaper. So, you know, we know that this model can work. We know that this is useful. I do actually think this is probably the least interesting of the shuffling cards, particularly because of that rune throwing you a bit of a loop. If you want to weave blood in, this could be a cut. I also think this is just a little bit less reliable early on. Like, you know, you don't always have a good option here. The other ones you can kind of just play and get things moving. This one, certain decks and matchups might get a little bit stuck in hand or feel hard to utilize, which it probably isn't a big deal. This deck's looking to go so long, but just something to keep in mind. There are essentially a couple downsides to this one that I don't think exist on the other ones quite so much. So this might be the first one cut, but you might just always need all 4 to make sure you have the right density of plagues in the opponent's deck. That's going to be a little bit of a deck building challenge, and see what lines up. And it may shift on metas too. If blood package is needed for survivability, maybe this goes away for a while. Maybe in a future meta, this comes back when you don't need as much survivability. So maybe the most flexible of the options. Now moving on, it's not done there. Those are all the cards that shuffle them in, but we also have some payoff cards like the Chained Guardian here. This is an 11 mana 8/5 with Rush and Reborn, and it costs 1 less for each plague shuffled into the enemy deck this game, which makes this thing really scary pretty fast, I think, and might be a reason you can't cut a card like this as well, again, just to hit that proper density. But if you look, right, we have a play on 1, we have a play on 2, we have a play on 3, or this could also go on 3, and we have a play on 4 that are all shuffling. You know, this is 3, this is 2, that's 5, this could be 7, Helia could be 10, which means you could have a 1-cost Chain Guardian on turn 5. Maybe, you know, maybe a 2 or 3 a turn earlier, even if you want, you know, turn 4 or something. You don't play the Helia, you play this to catch up on board. And man, this is a really scary threat at that stage in the game. Like, not only is it going to take a good trade often into something on your opponent's board with Rush, it's going to value trade in many cases, leaving behind this kind of 2-part, really aggressive, scary body. The opponent has to figure out how to deal with it. It's like, oh, there's an 8/2, but if I kill it, they've got an 8/1. I've got to weave together so many different things. It's only turn 4 or 5. My God, this is horrifying. Now, of course, obviously, there are certainly other instances where that's not going to happen, where you don't hit the perfect curve, because ultimately this is just 4 cards or sort of 7 cards out of a 30-card deck. So often the Chain Guardian will be coming down much later, but still, this is a really great reactive removal tool in the late game as well, because if you have to trade into your opponent's big stuff, this can two for, this can hit 2 different targets all by itself, and kill 2 8/8s even if needed. So even if you have to play this on turn 7 or 8 just to stay alive, it's going to be a really cheap way to react very efficiently to your opponent's board. So I think this actually looks like a nuts payoff card as well for your Plague deck. And then our final payoff card here for the Plague deck is Tomb Traitor. This is a 4-mana 4/3. This also has the Unholy Frost. So again, this is the one that's creating a bit of a challenge. I think you'll probably have to lead into both of these, all things considered, but just a possibility to keep in mind. It's got Battlecry, destroy a plague in your opponent's deck to deal 3 damage to all enemy minions. So this has an additional downside where you actually have to sacrifice one of your plagues in their deck, which, if you have 7 or 8 in there, you're probably not too sad about. If you need this 3 damage AoE, you're going to need the 3 damage AoE. It's not like you can forego that decision. It's going to demand it. And obviously, that's a really good AoE early in the game. You get your own body down, which is great for a deck that probably cares a lot about chip damage. Just a little 4/3 sneaking an attack through to face sometimes left over is going to be meaningful and a big deal. So it's a great swing early on. That's the right shape of swing at that stage of the game. And I think between the 3 Plague cards, this will hit very often on turn 4 as needed as well. So this actually looks like another insane payoff, and it's probably the reason you have to run Frost. I don't actually know if you can cut Frost. It's certainly something to consider, but this is just really, really good as far as a payoff is concerned. So when I look at all of these cards in total, this looks like a really good package to me. Not only do you have the long-term setup with the plagues, right, but you're not sacrificing too much in the process of that either. Like, these plays aren't bad along the way. I mean, I guess Helia's kind of bad as a 4-mana 4/4, but every other play is okay. And the plagues aren't just damage, right? They're not just that end of game, like, okay, you win once you win. They're doing stuff along the way. So they're going to help you kind of catch up any tempo sacrifices you made as you played some of these, slightly underwhelming cards. These okay cards are going to be made up for by the big payoffs and the plagues themselves, chipping in a little bit of incremental upside as you go. So it's like, yeah, okay, I played a 2-mana 3/2, that's not great, but my opponent's card is now 1 more, and they've sacrificed a little tempo as well. Or I get a free 2/2 out of it, which helps me catch up some of that tempo. So ultimately, this looks like the right mix of long-term, mid-ground, and some immediate, super impactful plays like Chain Guardian and Tomb Traitor as well, that I think this package comes together really, really nicely and looks like it could be, the win condition in a given deck. Now, again, this is not an entire deck, right? We're talking about maybe 11 cards. There's 5 and a legendary, so you need 20 more cards to support this. What that looks like, what packages go around this, I don't know exactly yet. Could be Unholy Swarmy stuff, could be Stally stuff with like Frost, some freezes and delays. Could just be removal latent to make sure the plagues overwhelm people. We don't know. We'll see. But this is a good core package that will slot into something, I think, rather effectively for sure. Okay, so maybe I lied. Maybe Mill Death Knight could actually really maybe kind of be a thing. This is Frozen Over, a 2-mana Frost spell and Frost Rune too. Both players draw 2 cards. Your opponent cannot play them next turn. So if you've spent some time shuffling a bunch of plagues into your opponent's deck, you can use Frozen Over to make your opponent draw and hopefully draw into some of your plagues. Notably, if they don't draw plagues and they get regular cards instead, it's nice that they won't be able to play those right away. So you are giving them some resources, but they're at least resources on a little bit of a delay. So you have some time maybe to get ready for those additional resources, or the opponent, just can't do something awesome right away with whatever you gave them, which if you're playing the long game in a plague deck anyway, they're still going to get those resources, right? It's still a net gain for them overall. They don't probably care too much that they can't do it for a turn. It's also worth noting that if the Frozen Over actually draws the plague, and then the plague draws another card because it's cast when drawn, the plague is what would be impacted here by the Frozen Over, and the card drawn off the cast when drawn would not be affected by the Frozen Over the way these things normally work. So they would still be able to play that new card. So, if you were thinking, oh, the opponent's on an empty hand, I'm going to play Frozen Over, there's no downsides. If you hit 2 plagues, they might still get 2 playable cards based on the cast when drawn from those plagues. So there could still be some notable downsides in those instances. But, if you don't hit plagues and they are on an empty hand, you give them resources that they don't really help for a little bit. So that could still be pretty useful. You, of course, also get 2 cards out of this. It's basically Cold Light Oracle of Old with some additional text and not attached to a fancy blue Murloc, which, you know, Cold Light Oracle was played. There were various decks that needed enough card draw that was worth it to give the opponent some, and particularly, you know, this is not really symmetrical if you're talking about in a Plague deck. It's symmetrical by the number of cards, but you should net more upsides than your opponent because they're more likely to hit Plagues either now or later because you're decreasing the size of their deck. And you're still getting cards as well, so that does make it look pretty good to me. The fact that there's symmetry, but a bonus for you basically out of that symmetry feels pretty good. And this is another Frost rune as well, so fits fine in with the Frost package that we've seen for the other cards so far. So yeah, does this get played outside of a Plague deck? I don't know. I think Death Knight has enough card draw in Frost in particular that this probably doesn't feel as worth it outside of a Plague deck, because that is really what gives you the bonus in that symmetry model. So it may not be a card that we see a lot outside of Plagues, but I don't think this is a crazy flyer in a Plague deck at all. I don't think it's required or mandatory necessarily, but certainly seems to fit pretty well. Next up is Northern Navigation, another 2-mana Frost spell, single Frost rune. This one allows you to discover a spell from your deck, and if it's a Frost spell, you get to freeze a random enemy minion. So this is a little bit of a stall and a little bit of a tutor, helping you move through your deck, finding the stuff that you're really looking for, big awesome Frost spells you care a lot about. This can help you get to them faster while also perhaps slowing down your opponent a little bit along the way, which you know, that's nice. That's important if you're in a Plague deck too. Maybe just having ways to keep the opponent in check while, you know, you're extending the game, increasing the odds they draw into all those various Plagues. This is also reasonable outside of that as well. You know, if you got enough Frost spells you care about, or a limited number you really care about, having a way to tutor into those, even at the expense of 2 mana, can often be worth it and feel like a good play. And you know, freezing a 3/3, freezing a 5/5, whatever along the way is a decent bonus. So giving you some time on top of that. I don't think this is a crazy strong spell by any means. At 2 mana, you know, it could maybe be like a 1 mana spell and not be totally busted. So feels kind of fair, but also feels reasonable enough. And then finally here we have the Eulogizer, a 3 mana 3/3 undead. No rune type on this one. He is a forge card though. You can have Battlecry spend 3 corpses to deal 3 damage, or if you forge this guy, you will instead gain those corpses. So gain 3 corpses and deal 3 damage. That does make him a 5 cost way to gain 3 corpses and deal 3 damage, which really doesn't seem very good to me. You know, there's a decent, again, turn 2, turn 3 line, as we've seen with a lot of these forge cards, where it helps you fill in a little bit. You know, you have the turn 2 Forge, the turn 3 Eulogizer. Yeah, he's good on turn 3, obviously, but I don't even think he's like crazy on turn 3. You know, better than an old SI7 agent or something, but it's not like a bonkers card for a total of 5 mana expense. So I think if you're playing in a deck that cares about this kind of card, that's like damage, that's undead, it's, you know, you're probably wanting to do turn 2 things. You're probably wanting to play cards on turn 2. You're wanting to get more aggressive starts out, and the Eulogizer doesn't really seem like it would fit that model very well. And if you're playing a deck that cares more about like the reactivity of this, like using this as a control tool to swing in the mid game, there's probably better ways to do that, right? There's just more powerful things, more impactful plays. And frankly, probably turn 2 things you still want to do as well. So to me, the Eulogizer just looks pretty expensive in total for what it does. So finally here we have one remaining neutral card. This was like in a random email from Blizzard. It's Storm Giant, an 8 mana 8/8 taunt. With Forge, it costs 2 less and it can be forged endlessly. I think people are anticipating it can be forged endlessly. Here it is. It's Storm Giant. And yeah, okay, so, you know, an 8/8 taunt is big, and, you know, yeah, 0 mana 8/8 taunts are cool, and you can get this down to be a 0 mana 8/8 taunt. The problem is you have to spend 8 mana to do that. The forge expenses here are 1-to-1. It costs 2 to forge something, and it costs 2 less. So you're not netting any advantage every single time you forge, which feels way too honest for this card to be good. You know, there is this sort of old school Mountain Giant line you can take with this. Back in the days, Handlock would tap on 2, tap on 3, Mountain Giant on turn 4, and, you know, in the old days of 4 mana 8/8 was insane. And then you'd taunt it up with Defender of Argus, and man, those are the days. I miss that a little bit. Storm Giant's just worse than that, right? Because the life tap was awesome because you got cards in hand. You wanted cards in hand anyway. The whole deck was built around having a big hand and paying off a big hand in large part thanks to the Mountain Giants, but also Twilight Drakes and stuff. This doesn't give you anything else. This doesn't have a bonus tied to the 2 mana you're spending. It's just 2 mana, and it's just discounting the Storm Giant. There's no other additional upside. So you can spend 2 on 2 and 2 on 3 and play a 4 mana Storm Giant on turn 4. And it does have taunt built in, which is, I mean, that's cool, right? But is it okay that you've skipped your turn 2 and your turn 3? And is this card any good if you get it later in the game? Like, isn't it only great on turn 4? Later in the game, spending 2 to discount this, I think feels pretty bad, right? So certainly there are some decks that can forego some early game and recover late, but is this the most exciting way to do that? Are there other things you'd rather do? Would you rather just draw cards onto? Would you rather generate resources onto? I don't see it, man. This seems like it's just coming down too late. It feels like a 2017 Hearthstone play or a 2014 Hearthstone play, maybe, instead of a 2023 Hearthstone play. So I don't think most decks are going to be willing to do that. Playing some awesome removal card, playing a location early to set up for later. There's other things you can do in those first few turns as opposed to forging your Storm Giant. So I just don't think this ever gets there. This looks really weak in Standard. Helya is a 4-star card. Staff of the Primus is a 4-star card. Distressed Cavaldier is a 4-star card. Down with the Ship is a 4-star card. Chained Guardian is a 4-star card. Tomb Trader is a 4-star card. Frozen Over is a 4-star card. Northern Navigation is a 3-star card. Eulogizer is a 2-star card. Storm Giant is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for Death Knight. I like this package. I think this looks really fun. This is one of those really parasitic packages, which means, it's all about plagues, and you're only getting plagues in this expansion, probably. I mean, not necessarily, but it's kind of maybe got one shot to be good with this given package. I mean, it can always come back in a fashion later on, but it's probably not going to get a ton of additional support cards, maybe like one in a mini set or a couple in a mini set or something. But these are risky. In other words, like, I think this is going to be good. I think this is going to get there. But if it doesn't, we may never see or hear from it again because it may never get a chance to succeed in the future. So just always keep that sort of thing in mind. That said, curious if you think this gets there, if this is good enough. Leave those thoughts down in the comments below. Thanks much as always for watching. And until next time, game on.